The sun dipped low over Magnolia Lane, casting long, languid shadows across the manicured lawns and trim hedgerows. On most days, this suburban tableau was a picture of harmony and routine, but beneath its polished exterior simmered the low hum of discord, whispered in meetings, and exchanged in furtive glances between driveways. My home, with its weathered picket fence and unapologetically unruly garden, had become an unlikely focal point of contention. I fancied it a symphony of wildflowers and climbing ivy. But to Karen, the self-appointed enforcer of the homeowners association, it was a discordant note in her perfectly orchestrated neighborhood. Her first overture came in the form of a tersely worded note slipped under my door. It was an impressive feat of bureaucratic passive aggression, each word dripping with thinly veiled disdain for my nonconforming ways. The note was a formal reminder of community standards, embellished with threats of fines and consequences wrapped in the false pleasantries of concern for neighborhood aesthetics. I read it calmly over my morning coffee. The steam curled upwards, misting my glasses as I considered the implications. Her complaints were as predictable as the seasons, the faded hue of my mailbox, the audacious height of my lawn, the occasional dandelion daring to bloom amidst the grass. I could almost hear her voice narrating each point clipped and precise like the snip of hedge clippers. Yet I chose to respond with stillness. I folded her note neatly and tucked it into a drawer already brimming with similar correspondence. My garden was a reflection of my soul, a little wild perhaps, but authentic and true. It was not in my nature to bow to artifice or conformity, not for the sake of a woman's need for control rooted in her own insecurities. As the days passed, Karen's presence became an omnipresent specter looming at the edge of my consciousness. Her patrols were regular like clockwork, each visit marked by the rhythm of her heels clicking against concrete, an orchestrated march of disapproval. She lingered at my fence, eyes scanning for discrepancies, her expression a mask of practiced displeasure. I greeted her watchfulness with quiet resilience, tending to my unruly blooms with a gardener's patience. My hands were stained with earth, my mind anchored in the tranquil rhythm of nature's cycle. I understood that some battles are not won with noise but with steadfastness and the slow, deliberate cultivation of one's own peace. It was on such a day, when the clouds hung like heavy drapery in a muted sky, that she escalated her crusade. Her footsteps echoed with a new urgency, accompanied by the steely authority of law enforcement. They arrived in their dark uniforms, stoic and impassive, flanking her like a royal entourage. I observed their approach from my porch, a bemusement mixed with a tinge of irony curling my lips. It was a theatrical performance as contrived as it was unnecessary. My internal monologue wove between curiosity and a quiet resolve, wondering how far she'd extend her reach to impose her will. Karen's attempt to wield the weight of authority against my tranquil rebellion was a tactic as transparent as glass. As they stood on my lawn, their presence casting shadows over the daisies, I remained rooted in my resolve, as unyielding as the oaks that framed my garden. Here was the crux of her miscalculation. True power as I knew it lay not in intimidation or control, but in the unshakable certainty of one's own path. As the scene unfolded, I sensed the shift, a subtle but tangible turning of the tide. The officers, bemused by her fervor, exchanged glances their duty to uphold peace at odds with her pettiness. In that moment, I offered the only response that seemed appropriate: a serene smile, an invitation for reason to prevail. It was a silent acknowledgement that her campaign, punctuated by this dramatic crescendo, was but a fleeting storm against the enduring calm of my resolve. The irony, rich and satisfying, was not lost on me. In her quest to enforce conformity, Karen had orchestrated her own undoing. For in the theater of life, as in nature, resilience and authenticity often outlast the brittle facades of control. The morning sun glared defiantly through my window, casting a stark light over the chaos that Karen had stirred the day before. She seemed to thrive under the spotlight of conflict, her every move calculated to unsettle and provoke. By the time my coffee had cooled, a crisp white envelope lay at my doorstep, like a harbinger of inconvenience. It bore the official seal of the HOA Karen's latest weapon of choice. Inside was a list of alleged infractions absurdly detailed, as if concocted from a manual on pettiness. The grass was precisely 3/4 of an inch too high. The paint on my mailbox had faded to a shade she deemed unacceptable. Even the wind chimes, a gentle melody in the breeze, were suddenly a violation of community tranquility. It was a masterpiece of triviality. Moving through the pages of bureaucratic nonsense, I marveled at how Karen managed to morph into both judge and jury. Her accusations, as numerous as they were baseless, each citation was a testament to her dedication, a reminder that her thirst for control was insatiable. She wielded the HOA as a cudgel intent on beating submission out of her neighbors through sheer persistence. Rumors began circulating like wildfire in the close-knit community. Karen had a knack for whisper campaigns, her voice a silken thread weaving its way through backyards and book clubs. It was said that my disregard for the rules was an affront to civilization itself. She painted me as a renegade, a defiler of suburban sanctity. Yet, there was a strange power in her obsession. The absurdity of it all had a way of galvanizing resolve, and so I tended to my supposedly rebellious garden, each stroke of the spade a silent defiance against her tyranny. Neighbors offered furtive smiles, small gestures of solidarity that spoke volumes. They, too, were weary of the dictatorship of conformity. Karen, for her part, was relentless. She prowled the sidewalks like a self-appointed sentinel searching for any deviation from her ideal. Her scrutiny was a spotlight, harsh and unyielding, but I refused to wilt under its glare. Instead, I found strength in the rhythm of normalcy, in the quiet acts of rebellion against her manufactured order. The escalation came not with a bang, but with the whisper of sirens. She returned this time with an entourage of law enforcement, her final gambit in a game she had already lost. They were her knights summoned to enforce her capricious decrees, their presence a testament to her audacity. I watched as she approached her stride, imperious, her demeanor triumphant. Yet there was irony written in the furrowed brows of the officers, their patience worn thin by her incessant demands. They listened, nodded, and finally turned to me, their expressions shifting from annoyance to professionalism. Their questions were fair, their demeanor respectful, and then, in a moment, so sweetly ironic, it could only be born of real life. Karen's illusion of control shattered. The officers escorted her away, their movements gentle yet firm. A choreographed exit, fitting the drama she had orchestrated. Karen protested, her voice rising in disbelief, but the spell was broken. Her reign, fragile and built on the sands of intimidation, crumbled under the weight of its own absurdity. With her departure, the tension dissolved into the air, leaving behind a curious sense of calm. The community exhaled as one, the specter of her dominance fading like the last wisps of a storm. I returned to my garden, the earth cool and welcoming beneath my hands, the chimes singing softly in the breeze. The low hum of a lawnmower drifted through the neighborhood, a mechanical buzz interrupted only by the occasional chirp of a bird or the distant bark of a dog. It was the soundtrack of suburbia, a symphony of the mundane. I stood by the window, watching the street as the sun stretched its fingers across my lawn, painting everything in shades of gold. It felt like the calm before a storm. I had spent the previous night preparing, not in a frenzy, but with a steady, deliberate calm. A kind of calm that comes from knowing you're ready. The kind that comes when you've seen the chessboard in all its pieces, and you know the next move. I had documented everything. Every interaction. Every veiled threat. Every condescending note slipped under my door. By Karen meticulously recorded, I wasn't going to be caught off guard again. Certainty coursed through my veins, a quiet, unshakable confidence, like the steady tick of a clock marking time until the inevitable. I knew she'd come. Karen, with her penchant for control, her need to bend the world to her will, would not let things lie. She never did. When the black and white patrol car made its way down the street, I knew it was time. The officers stepped out, faces etched with professional detachment, while Karen trailed behind them, a smug satisfaction plastered on her face. Her presence was a storm front in floral print. Her approach, a whirlwind of misplaced authority and petty vindictiveness. As they approached my door, I gathered my composure like armor. I reminded myself of the facts, the clear, irrefutable evidence in my possession. There was a strange kind of power in knowing the truth, a resilient strength that didn't need to shout to be heard. I met them at the door. The officers, with their rehearsed neutrality, and Karen with her barely contained glee. Karen's voice cut through the air, sharp and demanding. She gestured wildly, trying to weave a narrative of my supposed infractions, her words weaving a tapestry of lies and exaggerations. The officers listened, though their expressions betrayed a growing weariness. In that moment, I was the eye of the storm. Calm-centered, I spoke little, my words chosen with precision, my tone. Even a simple invitation for the officers to review the documentation I had prepared. The stack of papers appeared almost innocuous, but it carried weight. It held truths that cut through Karen's blustering like a scalpel through fog. The officers' eyes shifted from the papers to Karen, their faces softening into something resembling understanding, if not impatience. Karen spluttered, her confidence waning like a wilting flower, as the officers turned to her, their neutrality morphing into a subtle dismissal. The tide had turned, and I didn't need to say another word. Karen's defeat was not a blaze of glory, but a quiet, extinguishing a candle snuffed out by a draft. The officers, no longer interested in her theatrics, gently but firmly guided her away from my property. Her protests faded into the distance, swallowed by the hum of the neighborhood, a buzz that quickly resumed its normalcy as if nothing had happened at all. As I watched from the doorway, a quiet satisfaction settled over me. The storm had passed, and I remained standing. Stronger, perhaps, for having weathered it. My home, my sanctuary, was mine again, untouched by the chaos Karen had tried to bring. I closed the door and returned to my window, the sunlight once more painting my world in its familiar, comforting hues. There would be other battles, no doubt, other storms, but for now peace reigned. And in that peace, I found a quiet victory, one that needed no fanfare or celebration, simply the knowledge that I had stood my ground and prevailed. The afternoon sun cast long shadows across the cul-de-sac, the kind that made time feel suspended, just for a moment. From my window I could see neighbors beginning to gather like moths to a flame, drawn by the commotion of Karen's latest spectacle. Her voice, a shrill siren, slicing through the suburban calm, had summoned them as surely as any emergency alert. The police, whose arrival she had orchestrated with the glee of a conductor about to unveil a symphony, stood by my front gate. Their presence lent the scene a veneer of authority, but their posture, arms crossed, expressions smooth as blank paper betrayed a reluctance, a shared understanding that this was altogether unnecessary. And there she stood, Karen, the self-appointed sovereign of our neighborhood, her gaze a flint striking sparks against the dry tinder of her indignation. She was the eye of the storm, surrounded by the swirling whispers and muted gasps of those who had come to spectate, not unlike an impromptu congregation at some roadside spectacle. My heart beat steadily, a metronome marking time as I stepped outside to greet this gathering, with an air of calm that belied the silent turmoil beneath. Each step echoed with the resolve I'd mustered over these past weeks, buoyed by the absurdity and the audacity of her relentless campaign. The neighbors, a scattered audience, watched with an intensity that blurred the line between curiosity and concern. Their eyes flickered between Karen and me, a tennis match of wills played out on the stage of our shared street. Here was the latest chapter in a saga that had become our own peculiar brand of community theater. Karen's voice sharp as the edge of a well-oiled blade carried over the murmurs. The words were the same as always, a litany of grievances dressed in the finery of righteousness. But today they hung in the air like laundry, left out in the rain, heavy and dripping with futility. The officers, their authority a silent anchor in this sea of drama, listened with the patience of men accustomed to the caprices of their fellow humans. I caught the eye of one, a flicker of understanding passing between us, words unspoken, yet perfectly understood. His gaze drifted to Karen, then back to me, a silent question hanging in the air. How would this play out? The answer was simple and inevitable, like the soft inevitability of dawn. After a long night, I took a breath, the air crisp and cool, filling my lungs with clarity. I met her accusations with silence, the kind that spoke louder than any rebuttal or denial. It was a silence of defiance, of quiet power that refused to bow beneath her onslaught. The crowd shifted, a rustling of leaves in a hesitant breeze, and I felt their eyes turn toward me, weighing the balance of power in this unfolding drama. Karen's words faltered, her voice catching on the hook of my unspoken resolve. Then a policeman stepped forward. His presence at last given voice cut through the tension, like a knife through butter. It was not a command, but a request, gentle yet firm, that Karen stepped back. Leave this stage she had claimed as her own, and in that moment she hesitated. The realization dawned on her visible as the first rays of sunlight breaking a long storm. The crowd, as if released from a spell, began to disperse, murmuring amongst themselves, their interest already waning. Their attention drifted like dandelion seeds on the wind, seeking fresh ground to settle upon. As the officers guided her away, I stood rooted to my spot, watching the retreating figures with a mix of relief and irony. The day was ending, the sun slipping beneath the horizon. But the real show had just begun. The neighbors, their curiosity piqued and satiated, would carry the story forward, weaving it into the tapestry of our daily lives, a testament to the delicate dance of power and perseverance, of standing firm amidst the storm. The world seemed to hold its breath. Karen's retreat, escorted by the very authorities she had summoned with the intent of shaming my existence, was a sight to behold, a tableau of justice and irony. Her indignant protests faded into the distance, a symphony of impotent rage dissipating into the suburban afternoon, leaving behind a profound quietness. In this newly claimed silence, I stood on my porch, the weight of recent events settling around me like a cloak. It was time to take action, but not with the same clumsy aggression Karen had employed. My path would be as stealthy and precise as a cat stalking its prey, unseen and inevitable. I retreated indoors where the air was cooler and the noise of the outside world seemed comfortably muffled. My fingers brushed across the smooth surface of my laptop, awakening it with a familiar glow. The HOA bylaws appeared on the screen, a document I had come to know intimately. Every line, a potential weapon. Every clause, a tool for defense. The mailbox dispute. The catalyst that had set this entire spectacle in motion. I had checked, double-checked, and now triple-checked the regulations. My placement was within the guidelines. Karen had no claim, no legitimate reason to harass. Yet her obsession had blinded her to reason, driven her to absurdity. Sipping my coffee, I crafted an email, each word carefully selected as if assembling a delicate piece of machinery. My communication was addressed to the HOA board, a chronicle of events interwoven with references to the specific bylaws Karen had violated. I attached evident snapshots of her transgressions, times, and dates meticulously recorded. The tone was respectful but insistent. The narrative was clear. I had been wronged, and the rules were on my side. As I hit send, a sense of calm washed over me, not the end, but a beginning. The first move in a quiet battle, one governed by facts and logic, rather than noise and bluster. I turned my attention to the next step. Karen had exhibited behavior bordering on harassment, something the law took seriously. Restraining orders weren't just for dramatic courtroom dramas. They were real, tangible lines in the sand. Drawing it required patience, a collection of evidence, and the willingness to follow through. I had all three. Gathering my documentation, I made the necessary calls. The voice on the other end was understanding, professional. They assured me my concerns were valid, that my next steps were clear. It was comforting, this quiet support. A reminder that structure existed beyond chaos, that order could be reclaimed. In the days that followed, the neighborhood was a curious blend of the familiar and the altered. Karen maintained a conspicuous absence. Her presence felt only in the whispers of mailboxes and property lines. The board responded promptly, a formal acknowledgement of my complaint, a promise of investigation, the restraining order was granted with a calm efficiency that belied its significance. It was a statement, an invisible shield that stood between me and her intrusion. Karen's world began to shrink, bounded by her own missteps, as the sun dipped below the horizon, painting the sky in shades of orange and pink. I found myself on the porch again. The air was cool, the evening peaceful. The neighborhood, my sanctuary, stood unyielding against the shadows. Karen had attempted to rewrite the rules, but in the end it was the quiet, unwavering voice of reason that prevailed. The law had spoken, and in its echo, I found my own strength. A strength that resonated in the stillness of the night, as enduring as the stars above. The air felt charged like the moment before a summer storm, when the world pauses in anticipation of what's to come. Karen stood at the end of my drive, flanked by two officers who seemed as weary of her presence as I was. Her face was a fortress of indignation, every crease a testament to her determination to reign supreme over our little cul-de-sac kingdom. But today, the winds were changing. I watched from my porch arms crossed, a silent sentinel, to the drama unfolding before me. The officers approached with the hesitant steps of men who had danced this dance before. Karen was talking, her voice a sharp staccato that echoed across the lawn. I couldn't hear her words, but I recognized the rhythm, the cadence of complaint, the insistence on rules, the invocations of an authority she desperately clutched at when her own slipped away. The officers reached me, nodding their greetings, eyes flickering between Karen and me. I met their gaze, calm and steady. The still point in this spinning chaos. They'd been called here for a purpose. But it was becoming clear that purpose might not align with Karen's vision. She had come armed not with weapons, but with words carrying the brittle shield of bylaws and mandates. Yet in that moment, I saw her armor crack. The officers were listening, but not to her. The neighborhood had begun to gather a quiet assembly of witnesses drawn to the unfolding scene. I felt an unexpected solidarity in their presence, a community summoned by exasperation and a shared hope for peace. The officers asked me questions, their voices low and respectful. I answered with calm clarity, each word a stone in the foundation of my truth. I spoke of inclusive neighborhoods and the importance of understanding of how rules serve communities, not the other way around. Karen listened, her eyes narrowing, each rebuttal she might have given slipping further from her grasp. The tension crested a wave that began to break. As one officer turned to Karen, his expression a careful blend of patience and resolve. It was time for her to leave the message clear, even in its gentle delivery. Her face was a tapestry of disbelief, outrage threading through every feature. This was not how she had pictured this ending. She protested, of course, this was her nature, a tempest that could not be quelled by the soft rains of reason. But the officers remained firm, their decision unwavering. The crowd watched, an unspoken consensus binding them more tightly than any rulebook ever could. Karen's retreat was gradual, a slow concession to the inevitable. The officers guided her off my property, their movements a steady beat to which she reluctantly marched. The neighborhood exhaled a collective breath we didn't know we'd been holding. As she disappeared from view, the storm clouds within me began to disperse. The air felt different now, lighter, as if a new season had finally arrived. I turned back to the house, my sanctuary against the chaos, and paused at the threshold. The community was still there, and in their eyes, I saw something akin to gratitude. But more than that, I saw hope, a fragile thing, yet unyielding in its resolve to grow. I stepped inside, closing the door softly behind me. This was the end of one story, perhaps, but the beginning of another. The neighborhood had weathered a storm, and while the skies were clearer, there was work to be done. But for now, in the quiet aftermath, I allowed myself a small smile. The world felt right again, if only for a moment.